Buddy. So Passover's coming up very soon, and so we had just a few weeks actually. We have two seders that in the diaspora we do two seders. In Israel they just do one. The first night is the April 22nd, and this is the time when in our community we have this as like a time for your home seders with your family, with our Ruach Israel family. Things like that. So what we want to do here is open our homes up to each other. So if you want to host a Seder, host one and invite people. If you'd like to join a Seder, ask around. Where can I join? Who's got an open place? That's just totally fine. And or see me or see Cheryl, and we'll kind of coordinate behind the scenes, and we'll see if we can find a spot somewhere, because there's always a place, and we can do that. And then on the second night, come to Ruach Israel here, and we'll have our second night Seder. And it's going to be a joy-filled, wonderful time. We have a new thing we want to do this year where we want to do a workshop on the Shabbat before Passover. So that's the 20th. We want to do a workshop, a melody workshop, to learn the melodies for Passover, specifically for Hallel, so that we can really enter in together and all sing. Rather than someone just leading, we could all know the melodies. And so we're going to do a melody workshop. So if you'd like to come, you don't have to be able to sing to come to the melody workshop. It doesn't matter. You're not up front. It's just learning them and singing as well as you can, and it's great. So come to that, and we're really excited. Now, before Pesach, I like to do a message where we cover the whys and the how-tos of Passover. In the past, I've waited till like right before Passover, but I thought this year, let's do it earlier when we still have some time to prepare and to make plans and things like that. So what I want to do is start with why, and then we'll get into some of the how-tos. So this will be a little bit instructional kind of message as we look toward Passover, because in our reading cycle, our tradition, we knew we needed to start right after Purim to get ready for Pesach. So the Seder begins with the why. And so to get into the Passover feeling, let's sing the why. Ma nishtana haylayla hazeh mikol halelot, mikol halelot. Haylayla hazeh, haylayla hazeh, mikol halelot, haylayla hazeh, haylayla hazeh, mikol halelot. Why is this night different from all other nights? So in our readings, we have the answer. In Exodus 12, this is the night that the Lord brought us out of bondage in Egypt with his mighty hand. And we Jews, we gather on Pesach to remember the Exodus from Egypt. In our tradition, the Exodus is the spiritual birth of our Jewish people that happened over 3,000 years ago. Now, instructions for Passover span across the entire book of Exodus in Leviticus, Deuteronomy. So the entire Torah, even in the prophets and in the Besorah, it's all, we see the Passover. In Exodus, keep it as a feast to the Lord, as a meal, as a festival, a moedim to the Lord, 12:14. Observe the Feast of Matzot, for on this day I have brought you your ranks out of the land of Egypt. Remember this day on which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So we're to keep, we're to observe, and we're to remember. Now, the Passover is central to our Jewish experience and our covenantal relationship with God, again, across the entire Bible. So even many secular Jews who do virtually nothing with Judaism but identify as Jewish will still come together for a Seder. For a Seder experience with their family. And this is something that has kept our people together. So let's unpack why Passover is so important according to the Torah. Passover is supposed to be a sign. That's our first point that we'll cover. I love this verse. Pesach will be a sign on your hand. See if you can visualize this. And a reminder between your eyes. This is like tefillin. So that the Torah of the Lord may be in your mouth. In your mouth. Isn't that provocative? And perhaps this is why we remember Passover by eating. What we're doing is we're eating the story when we eat the elements on the Seder plate. We're literally eating the story so that it comes into our mouths. like Jeremiah eating the scroll. Passover is a powerful sign. It reminds us of who we are, and even more, it reminds us of whose we are. Passover reminds us that the power of the Lord has delivered us with a strong hand, and we need to remember this as a people. It's a sign pointing us back to the Torah given at Mount Sinai. It's a sign of God's love for Israel. It's a sign of God's covenant with Israel. And more, it's a sign that we together are members of that covenant. In the Haggadah, we don't just tell a story of ancient Jews in the past. It's as if we were there with them. We went through the sea. We stood at the foot of Mount Sinai. And so this coming Pesach, we enter into not only telling the story, but we're supposed to relive the story together. That's the idea. Passover is intended to link us together as a part of God's work in the world. So individual Jews, we come together with families around a shared table. Then those shared tables come together as Jewish communities who all come together as all of Israel, making Passover a sign of God's relationship with his entire people to the world. You see this? So our individual Seder place at the table is part of a much bigger picture, much bigger work that God is doing. And so consider this. If Jewish communities are assigned with Israel and Israel is assigned to the world, then consider how critical it is that we Messianic Jews drink deeply from the Passover experience. If, as we'll see in our Seder, Yeshua is the deeper sign of Pesach, the Passover lamb himself, the resurrected Messiah, if he relives the Passover story to show that he's the heart of God's covenantal relationship with Israel, that he is the mediator of the deeper hope of Passover. If Yeshua is this deeper sign of Pesach, then Kol v'chomer, how much more so, how critical is it for us to enter into Passover as the Messianic Jewish community? I mean, I would imagine this should be more important for us than any other Jewish community. You know, not that it isn't for them too, but even more so. And this brings us to the second reason why we observe Passover. Passover is a shared community experience, shared communal life in covenant with God and Israel. So these instructions to remember, to observe, and to keep, these are community instructions. Passover isn't something that we're supposed to observe alone. And most of the commandments in the Torah that God gives us are intended to draw us together around shared instructions and shared tasks. So God wants us to gather together around his tasks so that we build community around him. That's the idea. We had a fun experience with this for our family during COVID. Many of you guys know this about us, but we love chickens, and we have chickens. But during COVID, we needed something to bring our family together and a shared project that we could really, we could turn that whole experience into something very positive for our family. So we said, let's build a chicken coop together. And with the help of the Davids, it took 6 months, and we built this beautiful chicken coop. It's like a chicken hotel, and it's wonderful. And it was the best thing we did because during this time of instability, it strengthened our relationships and our values, and it brought joy. Chickens didn't bring joy, but working together brought joy, you see? Now, many of the mitzvot that God gives us, these mitzvot, you might consider them like Jewish tasks that God has given us in the Bible. They're like this, from building a sukkah, to coming together on Shabbat every week, to Pesach, to cleaning your chametz together, to eating matzah together, to the Seder. All of these things are intended to build joy in our relationships by doing shared tasks for God. These tasks are not as important as the relationships we establish around a communal act of faithfulness with God and then with each other. So Pesach helps us to establish and maintain communities who then we come together by living out this shared covenantal life with God. We come together around his tasks and around his table. So someone might say, you know, I could go on a nice vacation and I could make lovely memories with my family, or I could do Pesach. Don't get me wrong, because I love vacations. I mean, vacations are good. It's good. But Passover isn't only about memories. It's memories in family, in community, in a people in covenant with God, linking these memories with God in faith. So it's critical as we pass on this intergenerational faith that we come and do this together. Now, even if you don't have children or your children are grown, it doesn't matter because you're still part of other families that have children and either other families that don't have children yet, you see? And so when it says our children, that's a community's children. So remember this now as we enter into some of the how-tos. We don't observe Passover in order to become more loved by God. Using some language, we don't do this to become better saved or to get brownie points with God. I think more we observe because we're already loved and approved by God because of his mercy and his grace and his compassion. And that's the approach. We approach Pesach with a full love tank from the Lord, from God. So he doesn't say, do this way of life to enter my covenant. He's saying, you are in my covenant, so this is how you live. And this is the story of the Exodus itself. He takes us from bondage, the birth of the Jewish people, and then brings us to Mount Sinai and says, now here's how you should live. Do you see? We're not living in order to receive the Exodus. And so we live the life that he's called us to live. It's simply the biblical way that God has given us as members of his treasured people, Israel, to live life with each other in a shared way. And when I say biblical, I don't mean ancient times. I mean the way that Torah and tradition has evolved so that we live this out together today as a community before him. It will set you apart. That's the purpose. It will bring you life and joy, and it will be a sign for me, says the Lord, to the world. Okay, another reason we observe Passover is to pass the torch to the next generation. In Exodus 3:8, we read, you are to tell your son, I'll add, or your daughter on that day, saying, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. Now, it's remarkable that we Jews have been remembering Passover for over 3,000 years. I mean, just consider how remarkable that is. We have been commissioned to be part of this ongoing covenant that must continue l'dor v'dor for generation to generation. If we've been doing this for 3,000 years and then one family says, I don't need to do this anymore. Do you see? There's a gap. There's a gap. It's fascinating. God didn't just deliver us from Egypt and then tell us to remember Pesach he actually tells us in the beginning. He says, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to do all these things. You're going to do all this stuff. And then you're going to remember. It's like, I'm going to tell you to do this, and you're going to remember forever, every generation. So we left Egypt knowing that this was going to be something that he was going to instill in us from generation to generation. So God has here, I think, us in this room today in mind before he even delivered ancient Israel from Egypt. He's thinking about their great grandchildren, and us here today. It's remarkable. The Lord has given us an intergenerational task. And as members of the covenant, we must pass the Passover on to our children because it's part of our mission for the Lord. Now, we don't communicate these truths through a one-time conversation. These truths are intended to be communicated through regular life. When your family comes together with your community and we relive the Exodus, it's as if we were there, like I said. This is communicated when you're at the Seder. And, when the Seder seems to go on forever and ever and ever, and the kids say, when are we going to eat? And it's this and it's that. That's all part of it. That's part of communicating this. The waiting, it's part of it. It's communicated when you clean your houses and you get stressed out because it's like you got to do all these different things and this and that, and you have a time frame, and it's communicated in that effort. It's communicated when you eat matzah sandwiches and have to stand out among the world and look different. It's communicated if someone invites you to lunch, but you say, hey, I can't eat in a restaurant this week because it's Pesach. These seemingly trivial tasks become the framing for the greater story in our lives. And then they create these lasting memories of family and togetherness that are not only built around nice family vacations, but they're rooted in the Torah and life with God. So, the next generation, the last why that I will share today is an eternal ordinance. Exodus 12:17, therefore you are to observe this day throughout your generations as an eternal ordinance. So I love this passage because when I feel overwhelmed cleaning out the kitchen, do you guys ever feel overwhelmed cleaning out your kitchens? I mean, yeah, okay. And we have a lot of kids, so we have a lot of crumbs everywhere. And the cabinets, and I begin to wonder sometimes, just being honest, does it really matter if I've got some goldfish left over under the couch? You know what I mean? Or the graham crackers under the car seats, or, you know, and it's fascinating because our tradition has a plan for this. Right after we finished our cleaning, right before Pesach, after we do the search for chametz and we find those last little pieces that we've hidden, and then we go outside and burn them, and we come back and we say this prayer: if there's any chametz I missed, I nullify it, it's not mine. It's a beautiful prayer. I love this prayer. It's like we give it our best shot and then we let God make up the difference. And I think the prayer reminds us that we'll never observe Pesach fully. There isn't anyone around who observes Pesach fully. And I think that's important because we must do God's tasks like Passover out of a full love tank as a response to his love, and not out of a need to do to perfectionism or to do something perfect in order to win his favor, because he already loves you and he's working in your life. And this is where this commandment to make this an eternal ordinance helps me, because I don't see this as an individual commandment. I've got to do this for my own sake. Right now, for me, it's just about me. It's not that way. It's a communal commandment. So the idea is that if the Jewish people need to keep Pesach forever, well, I'm a part of that forever. And I can't opt out of it. But I'm not the only part. And so we have other parts, you know, like Michelle, you're a part. And Cheryl, you're a part of this. You see, and Lee, you're a part, and Josh, you're a part. You guys, we're all a part of the Pesach experience together. And so what matters is that we're in the game, that our desire is to pass the story of God's redemption on and participate, not that we get every detail. So listen, make a mistake, and when you make a mistake, let it remind you of your need for the Lord's love, and your need for God's grace, and your need for each other. Okay, these are some of the reasons why we observe Passover at Ruach Israel. Now let's touch on how. So the first thing is to clean out your chametz. Now you can start anytime, and we'll be starting a week or so before. It says in Exodus 12:15, for 7 days you are to eat matzot, but on the first day you should remove chametz from your house. For whoever eats chametz from the first day until the seventh day, that soul will be cut off from Israel. That's a difficult word. We'll get to that. Now, there are two basic instructions here. The first is to remove your chametz, and then the second is to eat matzah. So the first question that we Jews needed to ask was, what is chametz? And what is matzah? Chametz means puffed up, and chametz is actually not leavening. So you can actually have yeast in your cupboards on Pesach. Chametz actually refers to these 5 grains. That's what our tradition decided Second Temple, early Judaism. Wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. So the idea is anything containing wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats is considered chametz and needs to be removed from your house. And the Torah says you can't even own it. So some Jews will sell it to their non-Jewish neighbor who isn't observing Passover, so they don't own it, and then buy it back afterwards. So we've done that sometimes. And our standards also allow us to kind of sequester it and put it off to a space that is like you kind of make it not your own in that space. So now there's a tradition that developed in the exile after we were exiled, and it was confusing that we would also include kitniot, which would be corns and beans and rice and anything that includes those things. So anything that had corn syrup or anything like that, like ketchup or whatever, that would be needed to be removed. And the idea was that when these grains were not ground, we might mistake them for one of the other grains, and then we would mess up. That's the idea. So we want to be sure to build a fence around the Torah, so we remove those things as well. However, recently the Messianic Jewish Rabbinical Council a few years ago and the conservative Jewish movement ruled that we do not need to remove kitniot. So for our standards here, we do not need to remove kitniot, just those 5 grains. However, we make a point to say if this is your custom, for the level of kashrut that you have in your home, do that, because it still can be very beautiful. Now, we don't eat anything containing these grains from our homes because the Torah tells us to not own any of this. So we've got to clean it all out. And that's the crumbs, that's the goldfish crumbs, that's everything under the couches. Look in the HVAC ducts, you know what I mean? I can't remember, was it last year or the year before we found the missing Hanukkah gelt from the scavenger hunt that was still there? There it is. So it's a really cool opportunity. Now, matzah means to drain out. In the Exodus, we're told to make bread in haste, to grind our flour and bake it right away rather than let it rise. So you might say, well, matzah is wheat. What's the difference? The difference is that it's baked in haste, like the Torah says. Matzah is bread that's baked in haste. And so the tradition that developed around, well, what does it mean to bake it in haste? Because we need to know, is that we bake it, we grind it, and then have to bake it in an oven that's at least 1,000 degrees within 18 minutes of when it was ground. And that's what makes matzah kosher for Passover versus if you get a box of matzah that's not kosher for Passover, it didn't follow that. Those instructions weren't followed. So it isn't just flat. It's because we don't want the grain to come into contact with water. So I have these fond memories of matzah making several years ago, before COVID, it was a while ago. We should do it again. At Cheryl's cob oven. Is it cob oven? Yeah, that's right. The wood-fired oven, because it gets to 1,000 degrees. And we had the timer, and we'd grind it, and then set the timer, and then get it in by the 18 minutes. And, it was wonderful experience. And I'd love to do that again. So the idea is that eating matzah is a positive commandment. We're required to eat matzah on Pesach, and we're at least an egg's volume, at least like a piece of matzah that we're supposed to eat in Pesach. Okay, now there are two sides to this. In the Torah's consequence of eating and not removing chametz from your home is very severe, to be cut off from your people. I like to see this rather than as a punishment. Perhaps we can see it more as a natural consequence. When a person does not participate, it's as if he or she is removing his family from the community's covenantal life with God. So if you say, no, I'm just not going to do it this year, it's too much work, you're removing your family from God's covenantal life with Israel over generations and generations. So the entire community suffers. The entire community isn't whole. Your place at the Seder table is empty. You see? And it's the same with Jewish life and with community. With Shabbat too, here, I don't say this very often, but the reality is, like, when any of us aren't here, we're not as strong. Would you agree? When we're not here, you're not as strong. And it isn't just about like whether I come to a Seder or I come to a Shabbat service because I need to receive something, or I don't receive something so I don't go, or I don't like it or I do like it. That's not why we Jews do this. Those things are nice. Receiving things is nice. But our calling with God is much, much deeper. You have a role to play. You have people to impact and a community to build, because we're here for each other. You see? We're here for each other. And so, of course, there are times when we need to miss stuff. We get it. Life is complex, and we get sick, and stuff happens. We get that. But I want to ask everyone here to think very carefully before missing something. Think carefully, because you have a role to play, and your presence impacts others here. And when you're not here, it impacts others as well. And our entire community suffers because we aren't as strong. So that's an invitation to think carefully. Now, I wonder if this commandment about matzah is so important to the Lord because our food storages in our home are like the heart of our homes. Bread is life in our home. Cheryl knows this as a baker. Bread is the heart of our meals. Removing bread and leavening from our house alters our diet. It's something that everyone in our homes is affected by. It's something that our families and communities need to come around together to observe. It requires an explanation. Mommy, why are we moving all of the bread out? Like, what are we doing? Well, I get to tell you about this. So this is important, and there are natural consequences for not living out Jewish life together. This is not condemnation. This is not shame. We have enough of that already. This is let's live life together, and like an invitation to come together around these treasures that the Lord has given us. Now, on the other hand, again, Jewish life is not an all or nothing. It's something that we participate in, and we do what we can. And we get that it's difficult, like I was saying before. We get that we aren't going to be able to do everything, and it's okay. So, listen, if this is new to you and you aren't able to do your Passover cleaning this year, just maybe let it go and try next year. Okay, we'll clean for you in our house. Do you see? That's the communal idea. Or maybe spend a few minutes and just go through your cabinets and remove some chametz that it's like clearly chametz and just put it in your basement or something like that. Remember, what's more important for us is the heart, to come together in community through a shared experience, to remember the Lord's great work, to be a sign, and to pass this covenant down to our children. And then very quickly, this tradition of matzah and chametz becomes spiritualized, and matzah becomes spiritual virtues, and chametz becomes spiritual vices. And so we can think of our cleaning this way. And Paul gets this. It was like this in the first century. And so in our reading today, we read from Corinthians. Paul's writing to these non-Jews, Jews in Corinthians who are followers of the Messiah, using a Passover analogy because he did this. Don't you know that a little chametz leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old chametz. That's your Passover cleaning, so that you may be a new batch, just as you are matzah. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the Passover not with old chametz, the chametz of malice and wickedness, but with matzah of sincerity and truth. Isn't that beautiful? So let us this year celebrate the true bread of life at our table, the true matzah, the life of Yeshua, the heart of our Passover. Now, the next way that we observe Passover is to take off from work. So Exodus 12:16 instructs us this way. The first day is to be a holy assembly for you, as well as the seventh day. So day 1 and day 7. No manner of work is to be done on those days, except what is to be eaten by every person alone, and that may be prepared for you. This is different. On Shabbat, you can't even prepare your food, but on holy days, we're given this exception to prepare for our food. So again, the first and the seventh days are a Shabbat, and you count the first day. Day 1 of Passover is day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this year, the days to take off would be April 23rd, beginning the day before, Monday evening, Tuesday, April 23rd, and then again, Monday, April 29th, again, beginning the evening before. And so my recommendation is to talk to your boss or arrange it so that you can take these days off from work and school and things like that. If it's too late this year, we get it. It's okay. Do what you can, and maybe schedule it now for next year. That's kind of how we do things around here. What's at the heart? Again, it's not about shame and it's not about shoulds. It's about, we're not policing this. It's about creating a space and a time for our families and our community to come together around these shared community tasks, to do life together with God. So if you just keep on going through regular life, you'll just miss Passover. You just walk right, you pass over Passover, And this year, actually, we're going to try something new. Dave, can I mention this? We're going to get together and pray Shacharit on Tuesday morning at our house. And come, we'll open it up. As long as you don't mind our house being messy from the Seder to before, because it's going to be very messy. So we can do that. We can pray together in the mornings, and if you're able. Okay, lastly, and then we'll close with this. At the heart of Passover is to attend a Seder. Now, in our readings today, we see that the Torah requires us to have a feast, to tell our children the story. But it's not just any feast. This is a feast where we eat the Pesach lamb. The Torah specifically says, eat the lamb with matzah and with ma'or, with bitter herbs. Okay? And so the word Seder means order, and this is the structure of the feast. That's all a Seder is, the structure of the eating the Pesach offering. So there's no temple, of course. Another time we'll get into that more detailed. But we're no longer able to offer the Pesach lambs. And so at the Seder, what we do today is we fulfill the mitzvah to eat the matzah with the bitter herb, and then we replace the lamb in a memorial way with matzah when we eat it, and with a shank bone to remember and keep alive this communal memory. So the heart behind this is God is asking us to eat the story so that his deliverance would never be forgotten. It's beautiful. And of course, in the Besorah, we see that Yeshua's Last Supper, as it's called, is really a Passover Seder. We like to call it his last Passover Seder. And in this Seder, he applies each element of the Seder to himself. Like the blood of the slain lamb, he will become our redemption marred by the bitterness of betrayal. Like the matzah, he will become our deliverance as the heart of Israel himself, he relives Israel's story. Now, this adds a whole nother layer to Passover for us Messianic Jews, because participating in the life of our Jewish community through the Seder is sharing in the life of Messiah and his great redeeming work. They're one and the same. So come to our second night Seder. We'll open this up in more detail and live it together. Now, we've covered a lot of ground today, I understand. We will have an email that goes out that kind of details a few things soon. But just remember, as you go through this, again, doing everything isn't as important as entering into community life and doing some. So jump in where you can. Maybe that's just attending a Seder this year. Maybe it's take one of the days off. Maybe it's entering more fully into Yeshua's life on Pesach. Whatever you do, stay focused at the heart. Passover is supposed to be fueled by the joy of redemption, of what God has done in our lives and in our people and what he's doing in our world today. So coming together as a Jewish community in Messiah to bring these important Passover instructions to life. And we'll do this in our homes. We'll do this with our families. We'll do this with our Ruach Israel family and with our people. And with that, Shabbat Shalom and a happy in advance Passover.